cord to this computer. Okay.
Okay, take it away, Jonathan.
Okay, I will kick us off, and you'll take care of admitting everybody.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this lovely evening. My name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm the chair of the Boston Ward 4 Democratic Committee. Boston's Ward 4 includes parts of Back Bay, Fenway, and the South End. We're delighted to continue our series of partnerships with kind of our neighbors just to the north within Boston Ward 5 Democratic Committee with kind of Beacon Hill, Back Bay, Bay Village, Chinatown, downtown, kind of South End and Fenway, as well as additional partners for this forum, the Boston Ward 1 Democratic Committee in East Boston, Ward 15 in Dorchester, and Ward 18 in Hyde Park, Mattapan, and Roslindale. Delighted to have you joining us this evening for our debate for the Attorney General's race for the Democratic primary. Some of you who are delegates to the Democratic Party convention in Worcester have that coming up in less than 2 weeks. And in just a few months, we'll be voted in early September, people will have the opportunity to vote on this race. And we kind of value as committees helping to inform and engage the public debate on these issues. Enough about us, and now about our moderator. So we are delighted to have Renée Loth here as our moderator this evening. Renée is an opinion columnist for the Boston Globe. In a distinguished career, she has been a State House reporter, presidential campaign reporter, political editor, and editor of the Globe's editorial page, where for 9 years, she was the highest ranking woman at the newspaper. She got her start in journalism as editor of the East Boston Community News, a scrappy neighborhood advocacy newspaper. She is an adjunct lecturer in public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, a former fellow at Harvard's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy, and was twice a judge for the Pulitzer Prizes in journalism. Through traveling fellowships, she has reported from 14 countries. We are delighted to have her moderate this debate and think she's going to do an excellent job. So to let her be able to do that, I'm going to hand over the stage to Renée.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for that vote of confidence. I want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming. Thank you. Welcome, voters. I also want to thank the Ward 4 and Ward 5 Democratic committees for co-sponsoring this debate and for, I think everybody needs to be muted.
You should have gotten an email.
Everybody needs to be muted. Sorry. Is that working now? Okay, maybe it is.
Yeah, we fixed it. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thanks. So I want to also thank the Ward 4 and 5 Democratic committees who helped shape some of these questions tonight, and Wards 1 and 18 and 15 ward committees for also co-sponsoring. But I have to say, where is Ward 22? That is my ward here in Brighton, and I guess they're MIA today. So anyway, in a moment, I'm going to be introducing the candidates to you. And then in lieu of opening statements, we'll have an opening question from me, the same question for all 3 candidates. And the candidates know the rules. I'll ask the questions and you'll give the answers. And you will give the answers, because if I don't hear the answers, I'll be asking the questions again. You have 90 seconds to answer the questions. And if there's a rebuttal warranted, and I'll make that decision, you have 30 seconds to answer for rebuttal. So 90 seconds for the question, 30 seconds for the rebuttal. And we have with us tonight a timekeeper, Lauren. You'll see a countdown clock on your screens. And Lauren, I will let you all know, has a mute button, and she is not averse to using it. So do try to stay within the 90-second or 30-second time limits. About halfway through this debate, we'll be switching it up a little bit, and you'll each have an opportunity to ask a question of one of your opponents, although you don't know which one yet. And we'll be doing that about 7:15. And then we'll also throw in some yes/no questions and a little lightning round and a couple of surprises, and we're off to the races. So let me introduce our candidates tonight. Andrea Campbell, I'll do this in alphabetical order, served on the Boston City Council for 6 years, including as president of the City Council. And she previously worked as legal counsel for Governor Deval Patrick. Shannon Liss-Riordan is an employment lawyer in private practice, where she has won class action lawsuits to protect workers in the food service, cleaning, and other industries. And Quentin Palfrey was most recently the acting general counsel for the U.S. Department of Commerce under President Biden, and he was the first chief of the healthcare division in the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. So if you want to read their full bios, you can go to their websites, which will all be listed in the chat box. You can all find out more about them there. So, and in fact, my first question has something to do with that. Most, I think, of the viewers who are with us tonight, the voters who have tuned in, and we have well over 100 of them, know you or are familiar with you all from some other campaign that you've run. Andrea ran for mayor of Boston last year. Shannon ran for the US Senate in 2020, and Quentin was a candidate for lieutenant governor in 2018. So my question to you, and it's the same question to all three of you, is, so why Attorney General this time? Other than the fact that the job is open, what is it in particular about the Attorney General's race that speaks to you? Why the Attorney General and why now? And I think I'll go in reverse alphabetical order for this, just to mix it up. So that starts with Quentin Palfrey, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for having us here tonight. As a former Assistant Attorney General, I've seen firsthand how much impact the people's lawyer can have on our lives all across the Commonwealth. When Trump was in office, it was inspiring to see the AG fight back again and again and again against a corrupt and immoral administration. But now more than ever, with our fundamental values under attack and the US Supreme Court with our democracy literally under attack, I think there's a particularly important role for the state attorney general and for the states in general to stand up for our most important rights and take on the biggest challenges: racial injustice, the climate crisis, attacks on our democracy, attacks on workers' rights, reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, student loan debt and housing costs, gun violence. We have a lot of work to do. I've had the honor to serve in the White House under President Barack Obama. I had the honor to serve in the Biden administration starting on day one to help launch the Build Back Better agenda. And I think this is a particularly important time for state attorneys general. And I think it's a particularly important time to have, as Attorney General, someone who is well equipped to use the levers of that office to take on these really big challenges. I was honored to be the Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor in 2018, but in some ways I'm really a lawyer and I'm excited to make this role.
Great, thank you. Right on time. Shannon, how about you? Why AG, why now?
All right, thank you so much, Renee, and thank you for all the organizers tonight. It's great to be here tonight. I'm Shannon Liss-Riordan. I'm very excited about this run for Attorney General, and I'll tell you why. I have spent the last 20 years of my career acting as a private attorney general. I've made national headlines taking on some of the largest corporations and most powerful interests in America, and time have beaten the odds and won against corporations like Starbucks, FedEx, Uber, my alma mater, Harvard University. I am the only candidate in this race who's an actual practicing lawyer. I am the only candidate who has run a law firm. I have changed industries through my litigation across Massachusetts and throughout the country. I've won the jury trials, I've won the appeals. I have helped shape the law to more fairly serve the people. And I'm very excited about putting this experience and skills and my passion to work fighting for you, for the people of Massachusetts. I'm very honored to have received just last week the endorsement of the Massachusetts AFL-CIO, representing more than 500,000 working people across Massachusetts. And the work that I've done shaping the law and changing industries in the workers' rights field, that's the type of experience and energy I'm going to bring to protecting consumer rights, fighting environmental degradation, upholding racial justice, and making sure that the Mass AG's office is on the right side of the issue. So I am so looking forward to this race and to our discussion tonight.
Nicely done. Andrea.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you, of course, to all the wards that are hosting I'm in Ward 17. They would be hosting, I think. I'm not sure if everyone was invited to participate. So I want to acknowledge every single ward in Boston, of course, that is doing remarkable work. And thank you to the organizers for tonight. I didn't jump into this race lightly. I talked to a lot of folks, some lawyers who work in the AG's office, previous attorney generals, and I prayed on it. I often talk about my faith, and ultimately took the leap of faith thinking about the loss of my twin brother, Andre. This race actually is very personal and probably more personal than any other race I've ever been a part of. My twin brother, Andre, as some of you know, died 10 years ago while in the custody of the Department of Correction when he was only 29 years old as a result of receiving inadequate health care. I've always said that my family still doesn't know under what circumstances he passed. We just know it was inadequate health care while in the custody of the Department of Correction. And what I've been stressing to folks is that the Attorney General's office has such tremendous power as a state's attorney to really push the Department of Correction and so many other agencies to do and be better, be more transparent, be more accountable. So it took that leap of faith, thinking deeply about the personal aspect, but then of course, talking about my personal story as it connects to the challenges our residents are facing every single day in the Commonwealth, and really making it known to them that the AG is more than just the top cop or chief law enforcement office. It has all the tools to ensure every family has access to health care, a living wage, tools to stay in their homes, to be protected against predatory practices, to deal with racial disparities, prison reform, and so much more. That's why I'm in this race and honored to be here tonight.
Thank you. God, that was great. Keep that up, you guys. That was really, really helpful. And there was that litany of issues that you all ticked off. You know, we're going to be digging into many of those tonight. But let me ask this, and I guess I'll go in now reverse order again with Andrea first. So you're all good progressive Democrats, and on paper, at least, you know, you all have very similar positions on most of the issues. So tell the voters, of the people who are listening in tonight, because they want to figure out how to decide among you, right? So tell the voters, what is the one distinguishing characteristic that you have, you know, that your opponents don't? Andrea.
I don't know if there's a timer on. I can't. Oh, I see it.
There you go.
There it is. So I think there's actually a few that I've been stressing. We are all in this race for different reasons. It takes tremendous courage to run for office. The one thing I stress is I think my legal background is actually more comprehensive. I've worked in the nonprofit sector, the private sector, state government. I worked actually and started my legal career representing children in education cases for free, especially students with disabilities, pushing for every family to have access to a high quality education, holding traditional public schools, charter schools, parochial schools, MECO programs accountable to delivering for those families. And I don't know that any AG has ever really come with an education background in direct service work for our families and children. I've worked in state government with Governor Patrick. I've worked as a general counsel at a regional planning agency that covers 101 municipalities in the state. But the other two pieces that are critical and distinguish me is my legislative background. I have passed legislation at the State House as an attorney for Governor Patrick, as a local city councilor, working across the aisle to get things done, which is critically important for the next AG to do. I've worked, including with Governor Baker, to bring in funding to our public safety agencies here in Boston. So remarkable work. And I'm the only candidate that's really worked at State House to get something done. And then lastly, my lived experience. And I know that matters. We say representation matters, but in this moment in time, I think it does. And that is quite distinct from the other candidates in this race as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, Shannon.
Yeah, so I think the main difference between me and the other candidates here is experience. I have spent the last 23 years as not just a practicing lawyer, but one of the top recognized plaintiffs' lawyers across the country. And I have delivered results. I've gotten hundreds of millions of dollars back in the pockets of regular people. I have taken on corporations and powerful interests again and again, and I've changed industries. A couple of examples: I changed the service industry in Massachusetts and firmly established the law through a string of cases that tips are for working people, not for owners. I took on the predatory janitorial franchise industry and stopped them from selling jobs to vulnerable immigrant workers. Over the last 10 years, I have taken on the gig economy, Uber, Lyft, Amazon drivers who have been subject to conditions by these companies that are trying to carve themselves out of all of our employment laws. And my work in this area has launched a national conversation about the importance of these workers having protections. As I said before, I'm the only candidate in this race who has actually run a law firm. I am the candidate who has used the law as a tool to improve people's lives, and I'm the one who is ready on day one. I've led teams of lawyers across the country, and I've coordinated with the AG's office here in Massachusetts and other states like New York and California. I know how to do this job and get this done, and I'm the most ready to do it on day one.
Thank you. Okay, Quentin.
So I have such great respect for Andrea and Shannon for their wonderful experience. I'd like to point to three things that I think set me apart in this race. And the first is my experience. I was a former assistant attorney general, was the first chief of the healthcare division. I also, in the Biden administration, led a team of about 400 lawyers in a $12 billion department with 50,000 employees, and took on some really big cases. And I think if you think about historically the skills that it requires and the experience that it requires to lead the AG office on day one, I think that my experience is most directly relevant. Second is in policy. I actually disagree with you a little bit, Renee. I think that there are pretty big policy differences in this race. I'm honored to have the support of Progressive Mass and the Progressive Dems of Mass. And on yes and no answers, we have very different positions on single-payer healthcare, on safe injection sites, on expanding charter schools, on fare-free transit, on police accountability, and on rent control. I have a bold progressive vision for this office, and I'm proud to stand behind that. And then finally, independence. I think that's really important for the Attorney General to be able to stand up against big corporations. When I was in the Attorney General's office, I sued some predatory health insurance companies. During that time, we sued Walmart. The AG has overseen charter schools when they have been having bad policies that violate civil rights, taken on Purdue Pharma, taken on ExxonMobil. The AG needs to be independent, and I think that independence is a real strength for me.
That's great. Thank you. I think for the entire rest of the 90 minutes, we'll be doing rebuttals on that. So I'm going to put that aside for 1 second and just say that this next question comes from our organizers. They suggested this. I think it's a good one. Who should be the most afraid of your candidacy? Andrea.
I don't know if I understand that question. Who should
be most nervous that you're running for Attorney General?
Folks who accept the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I jumped into this race to go after, and I've always led in this way, bold issues and to always be a leader. It's not easy to take on policing reform, criminal legal reform, and to really push, for example, for government to address public corruption. And that has been coming up quite a bit on the trails. We are crisscrossing this state. Residents really concerned about the misappropriation of funds, not just by, say, folks in public safety agencies, but city employees, state employees. I truly believe in transparency and accountability. And so those issues are important. Criminal legal reform and prison reform and juvenile justice. I don't know that any AG has been as bold as I would be on those issues. And I care deeply about these issues because I think not only is it personal for me, but many families, including, I will name it, poor white families living in rural communities in the state, where we still, for example, criminalize mental health or drug abuse or the opioid crisis, they also care about these issues. So I've never been afraid to take on the tough fights. And even issues that some consider to be the third rail issues, I always try to be. I always work to be thoughtful in taking on issues. And then racial disparities. Under my watch, it won't be just talk, it will be action, because for me, it's personal again, but something I know we care deeply about in the state to eradicate.
Shannon, who should be the most nervous that you're running for AG?
I would say powerful interests who think that they can skirt our laws and take advantage of workers, of consumers, of our environment. For more than 20 years, I have held corporate America accountable for violating our laws, for stealing from workers. I've gotten hundreds of millions of dollars back in the pockets of regular people, wages that have been stolen from workers. I will put the same energy and passion to work protecting consumers and protecting our environment. I plan to put together a fund that will allow people who've had their wages stolen to get their money back right away without having to wait months or even years. Similarly, I plan to hold corporate actors accountable who are violating our environmental laws and regulations, and set up a green bank so that we can fund environmental justice projects and clean energy projects. And I will also hold accountable those who violate our civil rights laws. Just last week, I was proudly standing in Rome, Georgia, with some very brave students who stood up to racism at their public high school in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. Black students were being disciplined for trying to protest unbelievably racist behavior by their white peers. Those are the kinds of cases I've taken on through my career. I've taken on issues, I've taken on industries, and those who would violate our laws and take advantage of regular people, those are the ones who should be afraid of me being Attorney General.
Quentin.
So I had the great honor to serve in the White House under President Barack Obama, and I've always admired the tone of civility, both of President Obama and of Michelle Obama, in dealing with a time of real contentiousness. Deval Patrick used to talk about this as disagreeing without being disagreeable, and I think that Mayor Wu actually is a great example of setting a tone of civility in a time of great conflict. So I would like to set that kind of a tone. I want to be fair to everyone we represent. At the same time, we're in an extraordinary historical moment where there is a failure of leadership at the international level. There's a failure of leadership in Congress, and the Supreme Court has been hijacked by extremists. And where we've had too little action, too little urgency in our government here in Massachusetts. We have Beacon Hill that is not transparent and that is not democratic. And so I would like to bring a sense of urgency to the really big challenges, to racial injustice, to the climate crisis, to rebuilding our democracy, particularly in this moment, standing up for reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights, which are under attack across the country, and we need to stand up on that. We need to stand up for sensible solutions to gun violence. There are a lot of big challenges. We need to be bold, we need to show leadership, but we need to do it with a sense of decency and respect.
So who should be nervous about your candidacy?
I guess what I'm saying is that I'd like to have a tone of decency and respect, which means that people who are willing to deal fairly have nothing to worry about. But certainly we will be vigorous in our enforcement of, say, the civil rights laws. So white supremacists certainly have a lot to fear. We're going to stand up for what we believe in.
Okay, thank you. So in a word or two, and we're already, God, it's taking, I have so many things to get to, but in a word or two, what is the biggest single challenge facing Massachusetts today? If you can try to just get it down to a word or two, Andrea.
Mental health, not just for adults, but young people and adolescents and our children. I mean, in every conversation, it's not coming up. That's a big one. And then housing.
Okay, thank you. Shannon.
Right now, I'd say the high cost of everything. It's really tough for people to pay their bills, to afford a decent place to live, to take care of their families. I think making sure we get back every penny in the pockets of people of what's owed to them, that'll go a long way toward helping people be able to pay their bills and afford living here in Massachusetts.
Great, okay. In a couple of words, Quentin?
So I would say structural racism and economic and wealth inequality. I think that we've got great differences in our society and that we need the AG to stand up for an economy that works for everybody, for a healthcare system where everybody has high quality, affordable healthcare, an education system where everybody has an opportunity to start in their life. So I think that we've got great inequalities in our society on the basis of race and wealth and income.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I want to start drilling down into some specific issues, and all of you, I think, mentioned the situation in the Supreme Court and the threats to women's rights to choose. The Attorney General's office protects civil rights, including women's rights, and we have a situation where in Massachusetts there are a lot of protections for women for their abortion rights, and we certainly hope, that they remain. But if Roe v. Wade is overturned and abortion is returned to the states, which many people expect, A number of legal scholars say that we're going to be in some uncharted territory where it comes to sort of state by state conflicts. For example, in Missouri, there is a proposal being discussed that would ban out-of-state abortions for Missouri residents by making it, by bringing charges against anybody who helps somebody in a different state. So a clinic in Massachusetts or an individual in Massachusetts who helps somebody in Missouri obtain an abortion will then be liable. What can the Attorney General do? What would you do as Attorney General to, specifically to protect against this kind of interstate conflict? Because I think we're going to be seeing a lot of it. Andrea, I'll start with you. Thank you.
No problem. A whole bunch of things. And we've been stressing this, of course, on the campaign trail ever since the memo was leaked. And there is real fear and angst, of course, in Massachusetts related to these issues. One, I think the AG's office has to use the platform to educate folks. As I'm crisscrossing the state, many folks actually don't know that we have codified Roe and that you have the right to not only get an abortion, but of course, reproductive health care. Most folks don't know that we have codified reproductive health care as a part of your essential healthcare plans. Many don't know that. And so I, as a counselor, went to the State House, testified with many of my constituents for the Roe Act and other pieces of legislation critically important to this conversation so that leadership would continue. The second piece is just that, looking at what New York and Connecticut have done. Our current AG is doing that with her team, working with the legislature and the State House to ensure we're protecting folks against criminal liability, against extradition, civil liability, the same thing. That is, if it doesn't get done now, of course, the next AG will have to take that on. And then lastly, the provider piece. More folks will come here for these services. And so that pipeline issue is real, working with our institutions, even our medical schools and others, offering incentives or whatever it will take to expand the number of providers that are available to provide these services, and then naming it as not just a woman's issue, it's an economic issue, and everyone should be a part of this conversation.
Great, thank you. Shannon, how do we protect against these interstate conflicts?
Yeah, this is an issue that's personal to me and has been core to the work that I've done throughout my adult life. I marched for reproductive rights in college, right out of college. After working with Bella Abzug, I co-founded a national organization for young women. We marched for rights and we traveled around the country fighting for things like reproductive rights. And then when I was in law school, I worked at the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy, helping with litigation around the country to protect reproductive rights. With the fall of Roe, we are now going to be seeing a new legal landscape, unlike anything we've seen in this country, possibly since the Civil War, with red states not only seeking to criminalize abortion, but seeking to criminalize crossing state lines to seek abortion services. This is going to take creative strategy, legal strategy to stop that from happening. I am the most qualified candidate as a lawyer to fight back against that. And I will do everything in my power as Attorney General not to let other states come into our state and enforce their laws here. And God forbid, whatever happens with Congress in the midterm elections, if a national abortion ban gets passed, which could happen once Roe falls, as Attorney General, I will never enforce an abortion ban here in Massachusetts. I will use the full tool of the AG's office to protect and strengthen the rights we have here for people in Massachusetts, as well as people who are going to come to Massachusetts, so that these services are available and accessible to anyone who needs them.
Mm-hmm. But what specific tools would you employ as AG to deal precisely with this problem of the interstate conflicts?
I will bring litigation to ensure that these other states cannot reach into our state's borders in order to enforce their laws here. And like I said, this is going to take some novel legal strategizing and thinking, because some of these legal issues haven't come up for decades, if ever. That's what I've done through my career, is I've taken out of the box legal thinking, creative thinking, and pushed back on some of the most powerful interests in this country and made inroads and changed industries through my legal strategy and leading teams of lawyers to get it done. That's what we're going to have to do next.
Quentin.
So we've seen this coming for a long time. This has clearly been the goal of a radical group of jurists within the conservative movement, and it was Trump's goal. We were protesting Kavanaugh because we saw this coming. And yet, when I saw that leaked opinion, it was devastating because of the breadth of the attack on the 14th Amendment, on reproductive rights, but also on LGBTQ rights, on equal marriage, on contraception, and potentially even on interracial marriage. It is a stunning opinion and is terrifying in terms of the next steps. And a few years ago, certain things seemed unthinkable. Children in cages, and a president who colludes with foreign adversary. Unfortunately, we need to be prepared for some really terrible things coming down the road, including potentially a national abortion ban. But in the meantime, we need to do three things. One is make sure that our laws are the strongest they possibly can be. The second is enforce them with vigor. And the third, Renee, is to your question, making sure that we create safe harbors for people fleeing from other jurisdictions, leading in the way that Massachusetts has often led, working with other states and in amicus briefs to try to push the law back in the direction of liberty and justice. Unfortunately, because the federal judiciary has been hijacked, some of the litigation that we're going to need to pursue to answer the question that you're raising, Renee, is going to be before a stacked court. So we're going to need to develop strategies working with other attorneys general, both to have those disputes governed under state law and to vigorously fight them when they're decided under federal law.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Wow, there's a lot of action just on that one issue. I want to turn now to employment law. A number of you have mentioned the gig economy, which increasingly is defining our economy in this state and everywhere. In the fall, the voters are likely going to see this ballot question, backed by a number of companies that Shannon has actually mentioned, Uber and Instacart, others, that would enable them to classify their workers as independent contractors. This ballot question comes out of a lawsuit that the Attorney General filed, claiming that these industries should be classifying their workers as employees with different rights. So quickly, I just want yes, no. How are you going to vote on that ballot question? And then I want to get into some of the substance. So how are you going to vote on that ballot question? Let me guess, Shannon. How are you going to vote?
That's going to be a big no from me.
Okay. How are you going to vote on that ballot question, Andrea?
No.
Quentin?
I'm deeply opposed. No.
Okay. So then the question becomes, though, how can we better regulate the gig economy? And what happens if we just heard, God forbid, this ballot question passes? It's not inconceivable. There's going to be a lot of money spent on this question from these industries. How do we cope if it does pass? And in general, how do we better regulate the gig economy? Quentin, you first.
So first of all, I want to give a big shout out to Shannon, who's done some terrific work in this space. She's really been a leader in the charge in fighting for against attacks on workers in the gig economy. We got to fight like hell against this ballot initiative, but this is just the beginning. These companies are trying to use Massachusetts as the beginning of a wider attack on workers' rights, trying to misclassify workers, take away their benefits. We're going to be in this fight for the long haul, regardless of how this ballot initiative turns out. And as you said, the Attorney General's office has been involved in that litigation. We need to continue to pursue that vigorously. The first policy statement I put out in this campaign was calling on the legislature to give the AG more power to enforce the laws against wage theft. This is a $1 billion a year problem. We recovered about $750,000 last year. We have to do better. We need new tools, but there's a lot more that we can do with the tools that we have. And I was in the Attorney General's office. I would like to see the Fair Labor Bureau have more resources, more investigators, be more central to the administration of the office. We have to be aggressive in this way. And also we need to take on big companies like Walmart. When I was in the AG office, we brought a wage and hour case against big companies like Walmart. We need to continue to be vigorous in the enforcement of our workers' rights and our labor laws.
And what if this ballot question passes?
We're going to fight like hell the set of issues that are going to come next. I mean, this is just one piece of that fight. It's a broader thing. It's way bigger than just Uber and Lyft. There are lots of parts of the economy that, as a practical matter, are now gig work. And it particularly affects undocumented workers and some of the most vulnerable workers in our economy. So we need to make sure that we're standing up for collective bargaining, for classification of workers as employees, for benefits, and for broad workers' rights. We need to build an economy that works for everyone.
Okay, Shannon.
Oh, well, thank you for the question. So this has been a focus of my work over the last 10 years, and Massachusetts is now ground zero on this issue about what is going to happen to gig workers. The eyes of the nation are on us. I am a proud co-founding board member of the growing coalition of workers' rights advocates, civil rights advocates, and consumer rights advocates that are fighting against this dangerous ballot initiative. It is now called Massachusetts is Not for Sale. So I'm also a proud part of the legal team that has challenged this ballot initiative from even getting on the ballot. And based on our work and an argument that was held at the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court just a couple of weeks ago, I think we have a fighting chance of keeping it off the ballot this year. But even if we're successful in that, they will not go away. I know this because I've seen it happen time and time again over the last decade. I've been in a chess match with these companies, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Amazon, and we need an attorney general who knows how to play the next round of that match, who knows how to beat these companies. The truth of the matter, Renee, is that if, God forbid, this passes, it can be undone by the legislature. In California, where they bought a similar law for $225 million called Prop 22 in 2020, that got thrown out, by the way, by a court. But they put in a provision there that it would take 7/8 majority of the legislature to overturn it. That's not here in Massachusetts. I'm going to fight like hell to get it overturned, because this is the tip of the iceberg. We're not just talking about Uber and Lyft drivers. This is the future of employment in America as at stake.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Renee, for the question. And number one is we are out there crisscrossing the state, obviously, and going as far as Berkshire County, true Western Mass, as a part of our gateway cities. And we probably have to change the name of gateway cities to center cities, because these communities are doing remarkable work. And so number one, it's just informing folks that this ballot question is on the ballot. There are still a lot of folks don't have a sense of what the question is, who it involves. And so we see this as being, of course, a part of the work right now, educating folks on what happens when folks are misclassified, all that you lose as a result. And of course, saying that in layman terms, in terms of wages, benefits, and what is available to you and your family. And so we are pushing, of course, what we can do right now. If we are unsuccessful, I actually like to give credit where credit's due. Our current AG is fighting the fight in many ways, taking on these companies, of course, in the context of the gig economy, Uber, Lyft, but it's broader than that. There are several other industries where folks are being misclassified that are workers of color, that are immigrants, undocumented as well, employers taking full advantage of these folks who may not even come forward because of other concerns related to immigration status, et cetera. So I think the AG has to be broader in scope to say yes to gig economy, but it's broader than even that. And so naming the problem of misclassification, doing the work of engaging more folks, more industries, working with the legislature. I think there's a lot that can be done on this in the State House side if this goes down, and with leadership.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to move on again to another topic because there's just too darn many things to cover, and this has to do with climate change. After many years of false starts and efforts, Governor Baker's plan to get a regional compact with northeastern states to help cap vehicle emissions, which are a huge part of our climate problem, has collapsed. It had 12 states in it at one point, but now we're all, with like the cheese stands alone. And so that effort is just not going anywhere. So I'm interested, and I have two questions around climate, but what is like the single best idea that you have to help Massachusetts reach its climate goals? And are those goals ambitious enough? Shannon, I'll start with you.
All right, thank you, Renee. Fighting climate change is obviously one of the most pressing issues that is facing us. That is why I called on my competitors in this race to engage in a debate focused on climate change so that we have a chance to share with the voters more than just a soundbite. But Wednesday night, we're going to be having a forum where we're going to be focused on climate change. So you'll have a chance to hear us talk about these issues in more detail. I would say that the biggest specific proposal that I put forth is using funds that we will recover from aggressive enforcement of our environmental laws and using it to set up a green bank to fund clean energy projects and environmental justice projects. Massachusetts is one of the only states in the country where the environmental division of the AG's office has criminal enforcement authority. And I've shown through my career how I am willing to take on the biggest players, the biggest, most powerful interests, hold them accountable in court, and I will lead teams of lawyers at the AG's office to make sure that we are doing just that. Now that we have this next generation roadmap that the legislature put forth last year, that's just the first step. And I know this from my legal career is that getting the right laws passed is only step one, because laws do not enforce themselves. We need a strong advocate. We need a strong, aggressive, experienced attorney at the helm at the AG's office to make sure we are using the full power of that office to enforce these laws, to make sure we get to where we need to be on emissions reductions.
Okay. Are the Massachusetts climate goals ambitious enough?
The goals are getting to where the goals.
By the way.
I'm sorry, was this one for me still, Renee?
Yeah. I'm
Yes.
saying you don't have to take the whole 30 seconds. That's all.
Oh, sure. No, I mean, I think we have some ambitious goals now. I think making sure that they are actually implemented is going to be the big challenge in the coming years. And again, I think we need aggressive enforcement from someone who knows how to hold players accountable to our laws. That's the role for the Attorney General, and that's what I'm ready to do.
Okay, Andrea, what single best idea do you have for helping us meet our goals?
So I'll start with your second question, I guess, first, which is, I do think the goals are aggressive enough. The question that residents have and leaders and organizations are our utility companies, are corporations and others going to adjust their business plans and change behavior, including residents, change behavior in order for us to meet those targets and those goals, including municipalities. And we know that we are behind schedule with some of them. So we need aggressive action. I will say I'm very proud to have the endorsement of Senator Markey. I'm very proud to have the endorsement in this race of the Environmental League of Massachusetts. And what I stress to them in my meetings with them, and why I think, and one pillar of why they're supporting me, is if we are going to be successful in this state, and it's going to require us to take the lead, because the federal government clearly is not doing what is necessary. We have allies there, including some folks who used to work in the AG's office who now work for President Biden, but they agree the states are going to have to take the lead. And if we do that, what's going to be necessary for us as a state to lead the way and to meet those goals is to make sure we are doing engagement well. Right now, too many communities of color are not a part of the climate justice and environmental justice conversation. Too many of our rural communities are not a part of the conversation and don't see it as a priority. So when we get out there, we talk about noise pollution, air pollution. We talk about all the jobs and the creation of jobs, clean energy and that transition, and making sure people are a part of it so that the bottom line of their bills, for example, they're not left holding the bag. So we're making it relevant to communities that often don't feel as though they're part of the conversation. That's
it. I think you got muted just then. Okay, so engagement, I think, is what I'm hearing as the sort of single big idea. And Quentin, then.
So what we do or fail to do right now will determine what kind of a life our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren face. And if you look at those IPCC reports, it's just staggering how little we are doing to meet those goals. In Glasgow, there was just a tepid international response. Every time Biden proposes something, it's blocked by McConnell and Manchin. And here in Massachusetts, Baker hasn't been anywhere near urgent enough in taking on this crisis. I take an idea from the Biden administration. I was the acting general counsel of commerce on day one, and the Biden administration issued an executive order saying that in everything you do, you need to take climate as a priority. And I think that's what I would do in the AG office. So of course, the Environmental Protection Division does vigorous enforcement, sues ExxonMobil, the Massachusetts versus EPA case, suing Trump over and over again. But we need to bring that urgency to the transition to a clean energy economy, our oversight of the energy and utility sectors. We need to think about environmental justice when we're enforcing our civil rights laws, because communities of color are hit the worst. When we're defending agencies or counseling our government, that's actually some of our best opportunity to expand the scope and bring urgency to that fight. And sometimes it's just about standing there with a bullhorn protesting against Holtec dumping radioactive water into the Cape Cod Bay, against the Joint Base Cape Cod. I'm going to run out of time, but this is a deeply urgent issue. I'd love to get into some more detail.
And are the Massachusetts climate goals ambitious enough?
I don't think anybody is taking this crisis anywhere near as seriously as we need to, either in terms of goal setting or in terms of the urgent action that we need to take. So I think the answer is no. We are not meeting the goals that we have. We are not setting urgent enough goals, and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will suffer for our lack of urgency. And to Andrea's point, because the federal government is failing, because the international community is failing, because Baker failed to have the urgency that we need to redouble our efforts. We need to set even stricter goals, and we need to push towards a clean energy economy.
Okay, this is a yes/no question, and it's a little bit perhaps not expected. So nuclear power. Does nuclear power have a role to play in reducing our fossil fuel climate problems? Shannon.
I don't think nuclear power is the answer for how we need to get there. And I also think we need to be careful about utilities that are trying to rely on nuclear power as a way of justifying that they are moving away from fossil fuels. What we need to be doing is investing in clean energy sources, solar, wind, geothermal.
Okay, that's like more than yes, no, but I get the idea. Andrea, does nuclear power have a role to play?
No.
Thank you.
Said yes or no? No.
Quentin.
I'm a no as well. I'd love to go into detail, but I'm going to go with no.
Okay, good, thank you. Because we've come to the point in the debate where I promised you that you would have an opportunity to ask a question of one of your opponents. And so I'm just going to do that. And I think I'll start with Shannon. Why don't you ask a question of just to the audience? The audience should know that they knew they were going to get a question of one of their opponents, but they didn't know which one. So I'm asking Shannon to ask a question now of Quentin, please.
All right, Quentin, I've argued and won many dozens of cases before state and federal courts, including appellate courts, and 7 landmark decisions that I've won at the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. My question for you is, how many cases have you been the lead lawyer on that have been reported, and how many appeals or SJC cases have you argued?
I've been the lead lawyer on a number of cases. When I was in the Attorney General's office, I led a series of cases against 3 predatory health insurance companies, Mega Midwest and Health Markets. We had a consumer complaint line into our office, and we heard over and over again that these companies were lying to Massachusetts consumers. We tried to resolve those cases one by one, and we realized that it was a pattern. So we brought an investigation, then we brought a lawsuit, and we pursued that case for a couple of years. At the end of that time, we got a $17.5 million recovery for Massachusetts consumers and kicked those 3 cases, those 3 entities out of the jurisdiction. I also was one of the lead lawyers on a multi-state effort relating to bid rigging and price fixing in the Attorney General's office. Massachusetts was co-lead with Texas, and one of those matters that I was co-lead on led to a $175 million recovery for bid rigging and price fixing. I also had the great honor to be on a Supreme Court brief when I was in the Commerce Department, along with Elena Kagan, in a successful case relating to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. On day 1 of the Biden-Harris administration, as the client of the Justice Department, I inherited all of the cases that the Trump administration was being sued on for the U.S. Census.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, Quentin, why don't you take a shot at a question for Andrea.
Wonderful. Well, so the Better Boston Super PAC describes itself as an independent expenditure committee in support of Andrea Campbell. In the 2021 mayor's race, it received $1.6 million from a number of sources, including large donations from Jim Walton of the Walmart fortune, from the managing director of Bain Capital, $250,000 from the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings. If you were the Attorney General and a company related to one of those donations, say Walmart or Netflix, had a case in front of the office, and if the lawyers in the office came to the opinion that those donations created the appearance of a conflict of interest, would you recuse yourself from that matter and wall yourself off from enforcement of those matters?
Thank you for the question, Quentin. A few things. First, I just want to stress that I have always been and held myself accountable to the people. I was on the council, as you can imagine and know, for the last 6 years, and always stressed that I was not beholden to special interest, to corporate America, always to the people, and that would never change. There might be several instances where a conflict of interest may arise. I talked about prison reform before. I have loved ones who are still incarcerated. I imagine in some circumstances I might have to recuse myself. I think any time a potential conflict of interest comes up, it's a case-by-case matter. And if it's required that I recuse myself, I will do so in order to maintain the integrity of the law, the integrity of the AG's office, and the independence of that, which I have no problem of doing. I want to stress, which is really important because there's such misinformation out there, that there are no corporate interests in this race. There is no PAC funding in this AG's race. All of my donations come from individuals. I've raised the most out of any candidate in this race. It is very expensive. We all agree to run statewide a $2 million or $2.5 million race. Very difficult for women, and especially Black women, to raise resources. There are many reports that tell us that. So I'm really proud that I've raised nearly $800,000, close to 95% from Massachusetts residents, which I think is in contrast to both of you. And so I'm working hard to continue to earn the support of residents and to have them invest, while also, of course, being mindful of my responsibility.
Okay, I bet you didn't expect that question. Andrea, why don't you ask a question of Shannon?
My question is, one thing that is really important to me is not only in the campaign, as we form our teams, and I'm really proud of our campaign team and the diversity. My field director is in her 70s. We have an intergenerational campaign, very diverse campaign and staff, which I think translates to, of course, what is going to be necessary for the next AG to diversify the staff of that office. And so I would love to hear from you, what are your plans? What is your current demographic of your team on your campaign? But most importantly, what are your plans to ensure the office itself is reflective and representative of the constituents the office serves?
All right, well, thank you for that question. I am very proud of the team that we have here at Team Shannon. I take it very seriously that diversity is important, and we have a number of positions that we have funded with interns and staff doing the work of the campaign that are paid so that we can have the kind of diversity in our operations. So we have staff members who are of color. My campaign manager is from the LGBTQ community. I am committed as Attorney General to making sure that we have a diverse and reflective staff at the Attorney General's office to lead the important work that is going to be needed that will touch so many aspects of Massachusetts residents' lives.
Great. You know, now that the question of PAC donations and campaign finance has been aired, I wanted to ask a follow-up of all of you, which is, you know, I saw, you know, both Quentin and Shannon at the State House today signing the People's Pledge. And I I'm wondering if you can explain to me. So to me, the People's Pledge is designed to sort of level the playing field so that the large donations of PACs don't drown out the voices of ordinary people. But how is that different from, for example, I don't know if it's happening here, but I know in some campaigns, people of means just use their own private money, their own personal money. They take out mortgages on their homes or whatever to finance their own campaigns. And how is that any different, really, than in terms of how is that any more fair than in terms of a level playing field than a PAC donation in terms of unevening the playing field? Am I making any sense?
May I answer that, Renee?
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So there is a big difference between taking money from special interests and self-funding one's campaign. I've heard this argument before, and I think it's completely disingenuous, frankly, to compare these two. It's apples and oranges. There's a difference between a candidate who has the ability to contribute to their own campaign and one that takes corporate money and super PAC money funded by some of the very same interests that the Attorney General's office is charged with holding accountable. I have been privileged to be able to contribute to my own campaign, and I will not be beholden to anyone. I've spent my career suing corporations and their executives and holding them accountable. I'm not taking their money. Again, I think this is an issue that the voters see right through, and I just think it's night and day, the question about taking money from corporate interests and their executives and having the ability and the privilege to invest in their own campaign, which I have done because I've talked to the voters across Massachusetts, and I've heard that they are excited about what I have accomplished in my career and what I'm going to do as Attorney General. And I'm out there, and I'm going to make sure that we have the resources to get that message out there.
Okay. Other thoughts on that, Andrea? Quentin? Andrea first.
I will say, I do think it is about leveling the playing field, and I understand that. And when you say it's about the people, well, you want the people, of course, to be investing in your campaign. I am really proud, and I can't stress this enough. And if anyone's ever followed politics or read any of the reports about just how hard it is to fundraise for a campaign, it is extremely challenging. And we don't need another report to talk about how challenging it is for women, but how challenging it is, especially for Black women. And so I am honored that folks have taken money out of their pockets to invest in my candidacy. Thousands of donations of every amount coming and investing in my candidacy in this campaign. We are building a grassroots people-powered campaign. And I will just stress that 95% of my dollars come from, close to 95%, Massachusetts residents. And the other two opponents are 50% from out of state. I think that is a big and stark contrast, and one that often probably doesn't get talked about enough. I will never be able to self-fund. Most candidates of color probably will never be able to self-fund. So I think there are barriers to entry for many candidates who would be great as elected officials because of that. And so I think it's worth talking about, not shaming anyone, but naming that so that the voter understands. And so I tell the team, no one is talking about this but us. We need to get out there and talk about the issues. And what I'm stressing is what I would do for the residents as AG on healthcare, wage theft, criminal legal reform, inflation, you name it.
Quentin.
So attorneys have a special obligation, a duty of loyalty to their clients. In the case of the people's lawyer, that duty of loyalty is to the people. The Attorney General brings cases against Walmart. In 2009, a $40 million recovery, brings cases overseeing charter schools recently in Malden when there was a discriminatory policy, brings cases against insurance companies, against banks like Bain Capital. And the Attorney General needs to be free of conflicts of interest and even the appearance of conflicts of interest. When OCPF sets the rules for the contributions a campaign can receive directly, they say a lobbyist can give $200 and an individual can give $1,000. Better Boston, which calls itself an independent expenditure committee in support of Andrea Campbell, received $250,000 from Reed Hastings, similar amounts of money from a senior executive at Bain Capital, large amounts of money from places like Stewart Health. That creates a very different set of challenges. And these are challenges that government lawyers are going to have to disentangle. It's going to prevent an attorney general from being able to perform the role of the people's lawyer to stand up against those corporations, not just because there are difficulties in being independent, but because there are actual recusal obligations that flow from huge donations that come to something that describes itself of being in support of a campaign, at least the previous campaign for mayor.
Okay. I heard the name of another opponent in specific, so I am going to give Andrea just a few seconds to rebut that, just a few seconds.
I think I made it clear in the first question when Quentin asked me. And what I want to stress is, this is not what voters want to be talking about. I can't stress, and what I mean by that is, this is misinformation. There is no PAC, there is no corporate PAC supporting me in this race at all. Every single donation is from a resident, or mostly Massachusetts residents, or a resident too who is outside, but from individuals, every single resident. It lives on OCPF. Every resident can go on and look that up and see who's investing in my candidacy. And most importantly, I don't want us to be getting distracted, frankly, by this and the continued sort of attacks on me related to this, because that's misinformation. There is no corporate money. There is no PACs in this race whatsoever. Okay. Let's talk about the issues that the voters care about the most.
Renee, may I ask a follow-up question to that?
May you ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
No, because we're going to get back to this later. Trust me. I have to move on to some other topics. Criminal justice is one that I know that you all want to talk about. So the Massachusetts House is set to vote on a 5-year moratorium for prison construction. While the Baker administration is sending out requests for proposals for a new women's prison, because the Framingham prison is, in very bad shape physically. Yes or no? Do you support the moratorium, 5-year moratorium on prison construction in Massachusetts? And then we'll get into why. Andrea, do you support the moratorium?
We don't need new prisons in Massachusetts.
Quentin?
I support the moratorium. I oppose the new prisons.
Shannon?
Yes, I support the moratorium.
Well, so where are we going to put these women who are now incarcerated in Framingham prison? And what are the alternatives that you'd like to see to incarceration? Andrea?
This is something I can't stress this enough, that I care, as you know, deeply about. I still have loved ones who are incarcerated. My whole life was connected to a prison system. My mother died when I was 8 months old, going to visit my father, who was incarcerated at the time. And my father was incarcerated for the first 8 years of my life. Didn't meet him until I was 8. So my brothers and I bounced around, sometimes living in foster care. He gets out of prison. I get accepted to Princeton University. I talked to him one morning. He dies the same evening. And so I've always done the work of breaking these cycles of poverty and trauma and criminalization. And there is a way to do it in this state, especially in the context of women. Alternatives. There are a whole host of, whether it's legislation or bills or advocacy from various folks about ways in which to actually incarcerate or to rehabilitate someone for some wrongdoing in their community. There's a whole host of conversations on ways, of course, to disrupt these cycles and to break and dismantle the cradle to prison pipeline, especially for Black and Brown residents. And that involves greater investment in jobs, education, healthcare, climate and the environment included. If you're living in certain communities that have noise pollution, air pollution, or rising heat, et cetera, there's a lot more to do, of course, to ensure those communities are healthier. And of course, dealing with trauma and mental health. Invest in that. All the things that allowed me to, frankly, be successful and be on this Zoom and to be a candidate in this race. It's not complex, it's not hard. It requires leadership and intentionality and investment in all the right things.
Great, thank you. Quentin.
So the murder of George Floyd and the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict are just the most recent reminders that there are two justice systems in America. We imprison too many people for too long for doing too little. Race has too much to do with who ends up in the criminal justice system. And the war on drugs has failed. We are not going to arrest and incarcerate our way out of challenges that are primarily about mental health and substance use, unstable housing, social determinants of health. We need to shift our focus away from a carceral mindset to investing in trying to deal with structural racism, give everybody the opportunity in life that they deserve. And a big part of that is disrupting, as Andrea was saying, the cradle to prison pipeline. We need to make sure that youth who are at risk of criminal justice involvement get services and help and diversion, that instead of escalating the punishments, that we help to use evidence-based policies like summer jobs programs, cognitive behavioral therapy, various kinds of diversion, substance use and mental health services to try to get them off on the start in life that they deserve. That's going to be the best way to deal with this. We got to stop criminalizing poverty. There's a ton more that we need to do in terms of criminal justice reform. I very much identify myself with the progressive prosecutor movement. I'm inspired by Rachel Rollins using a non-prosecution list to be innovative about trying to disrupt our over-incarceration, our racial disparities in the criminal legal system.
Okay, thank you. Shannon.
I think we need a reimagining of our criminal justice system here in Massachusetts. For too long, we have tried to criminalize and prosecute our way out of the opioid epidemic. And we've tried to criminalize mental health issues. The people, so many of the people who wound up in our criminal justice system have needed help. We need to get them help. We need to get them resources, not putting them away behind bars, separating them further from their communities and their families. We need to figure out how to get them the resources so we don't need to be building new prisons. One thing that Attorney General Maura Healey has done, and I am ready to step into her shoes and continue this very important impact litigation, is against the pharmaceutical industry, which is responsible for so much of this opioid crisis we have. One of the main players, she's held accountable and gotten a lot of money back for the people of Massachusetts, but this litigation is far from over. There are many players who still need to be held accountable and who owe the people of Massachusetts for the devastation that they have caused from the opioid crisis. I am ready to go in and take on those cases and make sure that we are getting these corporations who have brought us this crisis, that they're going to pay, that they're going to provide resources, much needed resources to get the people help and support they need so that we're not locking them up.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the, excuse me? I thought I heard something, sorry. The opioid crisis, which is, you know, it's so devastating. And I just yesterday was reading how, you know, a record number, 107,000 people died of opioid deaths, you know, overdose deaths last year in the United States. And it's a 15% increase over the previous year, which was already an increase over the previous before that. So we are really going in the wrong direction on this. So I guess I'm wondering two things. One, was Attorney General Healey right to accept the settlement with the Sacklers? I guess Shannon thinks she was, but I'd like to hear from the other two. And also, you know, a number of experts in this space are suggesting that one of the really important tools that we have in trying to break the opioid epidemic is a harm reduction strategy that involves safe injection sites. Where people can go and use their drugs, but get counseling, get connected to detox centers, this kind of thing. They're not legal yet in Massachusetts. So the question is, should they be legalized? Was Maura Healey right in accepting that settlement? Should we legalize safe injection sites? Andrea.
It's controversial.
Go ahead.
That was not me.
No,
so there is different opinions on the settlement question. You go in certain communities, they wanted the AG not to accept, and then you go in others and they said, we want the resources now. I don't know what the inner conversations were as to why they agreed to accept it. But what I do know is it is precedent setting, right? It is now going to allow us to continue to go after more bad actors, and not just in the context, of course, of the opioid crisis, the environment, et cetera. But I think it's really important, as I crisscross this state, we have to expand the framing of the issue. It is bigger and it's more than just an opioid crisis. We're seeing an uptick in drug abuse, high rates of alcoholism, connected to the mental health concerns we're also seeing. Uptick in depression, anxiety, suicide, not just amongst adults, adolescents. I was on a call recently with a doctor at a major institution that talked about an uptick in suicide amongst Black girls. And so this platform that we have, I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure we're framing the issue to include as many folks as possible, especially poor residents, communities of color, because it does affect all of us, including drug abuse. And on the mental health piece, really important that we invest more. I was in Berkshire County. If a young person is in crisis with drug abuse or some mental health challenge, good luck trying to find them a bed in their county. And so we have a lot more to do in terms of regional equity to ensure folks have access. And mental health, addiction, they all go hand in hand. And so I think for me, it's making sure we're framing it broadly and of course, pushing to do more.
Okay. I did not hear an answer, however, to the question about whether safe injection sites should be legalized.
So I just was on recently remarking on this issue. I would never, of course, as AG, stand in the way of a municipality. And there's an appetite in Somerville, Boston, and other municipalities on establishing these. Or I would never stand in the way as AG to the establishment of a safe injection site. But as a statewide issue, I think there needs to be more conversation, because as we're getting out there, there is concern about cost. There's absolutely concern about where these will be placed, especially, of course, if certain municipalities do it and others don't. So a regional conversation needs to have a statewide conversation, but regional equity comes up quite a bit. Communities of color concerned about placement in their communities, low-income communities, the same thing. And so I'm open to having that more robust, thoughtful conversation that includes more people.
Okay. Quentin.
So the opioid crisis has laid bare some of the really big shortcomings in our healthcare system. I'm personally a fan of single-payer healthcare because we spend about $1 in every $5 in our economy and get worse results than a lot of economies that spend less. I was the first chief of the healthcare division in the Attorney General's office, so I led a lot of the work that relates to this. I think that we ought to be moving towards more investment in prevention, and certainly in the context of the opioid crisis, that is prevention, like substance use treatment services, which, as Andrea was pointing out, there certainly are not enough resources devoted to that. The conduct of the Sackler family is just sickening. And I certainly wanted very vigorous enforcement, not just against Purdue Pharma, but against the Sackler family themselves. But I do think at the end of the day, the settlement was one that was good and will be very helpful. The resources that we can bring from those settlements, there's a tradition within the office of bringing in huge settlements and then trying to invest them in trying to solve some of these problems. I've done that with some cases, and I think that there's a lot of opportunities to do that. On the question of safe injection sites, I do think that they need to be part of the solution. The war on drugs has failed, and we need to be thinking about new solutions, working with communities who are affected by addiction, and really focusing more on treatment and solving the underlying problems as opposed to arrests and incarceration. I disagree with some of the initial proposals, for example, relating to mass and cast, because I think we should have focused more from the very beginning on treatment and rehabilitation and stabilized housing.
Great, thank you. Shannon, on safe injection sites.
Yes, I've been clear from the very beginning that I support safe injection sites. They are a proven tool to saving lives. We need to be using every tool in our power to save lives here. And I've heard Andrea Campbell say different things on this very issue, depending on the audience and depending on the time. In her campaign for mayor, she said very clearly that she supported safe consumption sites. And then just a couple of months ago, in response to a candidate questionnaire for Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts, she said that she did not support safe and consumption sites. And now, just a couple of days ago, and what she just repeated here is that she apparently supports them in certain communities, but not others. I think saving a life in Worcester or Springfield or Pittsfield is just as important as saving a life in Boston. Safe consumption sites are a proven tool to save lives. I support safe consumption sites statewide, and I don't know why a candidate who supports saving lives in the city of Boston would not support them for people outside of this community.
Andrea, you get 30 seconds, but you don't have to take them all, but you get them.
Oh, I think the host was trying to unmute me at the same time.
Yeah.
Thank you for allowing an opportunity here. First of all, I think it is absolutely ridiculous to suggest that I don't care about the lives of folks outside of the city of Boston. I care deeply and have lost loved ones to drug abuse, substance use disorder, have seen them criminalized as a result of that behavior. And I know why I do this work. For me, Boston is not the Commonwealth. The conversations in Boston, and we're a very Boston-centric state, are conversations in Boston. Now I'm getting out there, crisscrossing this state to have a meaningful conversation with folks across the state about what they care about in terms of the issues and making a thoughtful decision based on that. So it's not flip-flopping, it's being thoughtful, deliberate, and intentional and inclusive in the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're moving on here. I want to talk about a number of you mentioned at the beginning when I asked what the most, biggest challenge for Massachusetts, this sort of increasing economic disparities and the cost of living in Massachusetts. So I want to talk about housing. The housing choice bill, the housing choice initiative that's out there is there's been a lot of blowback from a number of communities, municipalities, not just in the suburbs, but a number of municipalities. Just to be very quickly to say that what is the housing choice initiative? It is a requirement that communities that live within a half mile of an MBTA station change their zoning to allow for multifamily housing. And there's a number of other zoning changes in there, but that's the primary one that's causing all the complaints. So yes, no, do you support the housing choice initiative? And, the idea behind it is that supply and demand are going to even out, and that if we increase the supply of housing, we're going to have eventually lower costs because of the genius of Adam Smith here. But my reporting indicates that it has not really done that. And we've been building, and we're still prices just keep going up. So the question, do you support the housing choice initiative, and what can we do to make sure that Massachusetts is in fact a more affordable place to live? Quentin, you're first. What? You have to be unmuted.
Sorry, I muted myself to cough. So first of all, yes, I think that we ought to have dense housing next to transit, right? The right answer to the way that we build out our lived habitat is to have affordable housing near transit. That's good for affordability of housing. It's also good for our climate goals. The Attorney General also plays a very strong role in housing justice. So I was in the Attorney General's office at the beginning of the housing crisis. And the AG office used its 93A tools, unfair and deceptive trade practices, and its civil rights tools very aggressively to go after big banks and other lenders who were harming consumers and using some of those recoveries to make sure that we could help solve some of those challenges. There also is a major civil rights aspect to this, and so we can use the civil rights laws to go after discriminatory lending and zoning patterns. There also is a lot of need to stand up for consumers relative to their landlords, and that is another area where the Attorney General shines as the people's lawyer. I also do believe that rent control should be on the table as a solution. I know that one of my opponents opposes that, and so I think it's a difference in this race. But I think that with housing costs so high, that does need to be one of the solutions, rent stabilization, that we have on the table.
Great. Shannon, what do we do to make sure Massachusetts housing is affordable? And do you support the housing initiative?
Yes, we absolutely need to build more housing, and we should be densely putting housing near public transit, which will allow more people to use public transportation, to come into Boston, to come into other areas where there are jobs. Other issues that we need to look at when we're talking about the housing crisis and how impossibly unaffordable housing is for so many people is that we need to provide protections, real protections for tenants. And one of the things I've called for in this campaign is that I would set up an office of the tenant advocate at the Attorney General's office to ensure that tenants have representation in housing courts, because you go into housing courts, the landlords all have representation, but the tenants don't. So I would make sure that tenants have that representation and that we expand mediation services in these courts so that they don't just, so they're not just mills for evicting people, but there are real ways that we can resolve issues between tenants and landlords and make sure that tenants get access to funding that would be available to them to help them pay for their housing. Also, taking on banks that are engaged in discriminatory lending practices. This is exactly the kind of work that I've been doing through my career. I have been unearthing racial discrimination in practices by major corporations like Uber, as well as even the state itself, which is engaged in discriminatory practices. All of this is a part of the piece to make sure that housing is affordable and accessible to residents throughout Massachusetts.
And do you think that municipalities ought to be able to impose rent control?
Yes, I absolutely agree with rent control as being part of the answer. And yes, I think that we need to reverse the state law that does not allow municipalities to implement that.
Okay, thank you. I've screwed up the timer, I'm sorry. Andrea, do you support the housing initiative, and what can we do to make sure that supply alone doesn't seem to be doing the trick? What can we do to make sure that it's affordable to live here?
So one is, yes, absolutely. And you're right, supply is just one piece of what needs to be a comprehensive strategy to ensure every resident has access to affordable, accessible housing, right? I love this question. I've been loving it since we launched the campaign. And one of our first Zooms was with a whole bunch of housing advocates to really stress, frankly, just how much the AG's office can do to help the average resident outside of how you traditionally think about the AG's office. Number one is with respect to potential foreclosure crisis. As we're crisscrossing the state, many folks are really concerned about a potential foreclosure crisis. Under the leadership of Martha Coakley and many others, 2008, 2009, the AG's office stepped up to work with financial institutions to keep people in their homes, establish grant programs to help people buy homes, some really innovative things that I think we're going to have to think about bringing back to address a potential foreclosure crisis. The AG's office plays a huge role in discrimination, enforcement of our fair housing laws, lead paint discrimination coming up quite a bit, discrimination against families, clearly a role for the AG's office to play with respect to discrimination. Receivership. You have the power of receivership to activate city-owned lots. That's what I did in the city of Boston. Right now, there are lots in my past council district that are being activated for housing and economic purposes. The AG's office can play a critical role in these economic housing conversations and opportunities in communities. And then lastly, I will stress this idea around capital. We don't need another report to say Black residents, brown residents, difficulty getting capital. We can change that through the AG's office and that work.
And do you have a position on whether municipalities should be able to reinforce rent control?
I think it's a conversation for municipalities. When I was, of course, in Boston, I wasn't for rent control, given the district I represented. I had real concerns about whether or not it was actually an effective tool. There are many reports that suggest otherwise. But again, I don't think that's a role for an AG to stand against a municipality that is putting forth something that will work for their communities based on conversations with their residents.
Okay, great. Wow, we are getting to the point here where I get to ask you like a fun question, like, you know, and it's not going to be like, what's your favorite snack food or your favorite binge watch or anything. But before we get to that, I wanted to turn this over just briefly to Shannon, who had an announcement to make, I understand, and then I'll come back with that question.
Hi, everyone. Before we get to our last question, I'd like to thank our moderator, Renée Loth, for her wonderful moderation of this event. I also want to thank a couple of other folks who made this happen. Obviously, we're all very well aware that Ward 4 and Ward 5 partnered together. We share a lot of communities, and it's an incredible partnership. But tonight, we're also joined. I also want to give thanks to ward chairs and activists, Vicky DiLorenzo from Ward 1, Ed Cook from Ward 15, and Cece Graham from Ward 18. So tonight we have people on from the neighborhoods of Back Bay, Bay Village, Beacon Hill, Fenway, the South End, in addition to East Boston, Hyde Park, Mattapan, and Roslindale, and parts of Dorchester. So I really appreciate kind of the partnership that went into tonight. And then I'd also like to preview Ward 4 and Ward 5 are partnering together on another forum, which will be Tuesday, June 28th from 6:30 to 8:30. It'll be with the candidates for DA and sheriff, and it'll be moderated by Danielle Allen, professor at Harvard, former candidate for governor, and the former director of the SAFRA Center for Ethics. I'll be posting the details into the chat, and I'm sure it'll be well attended and a great conversation just like this one. So hope to see you there, and I'll let you get back to it, Renee, and thank you to these candidates who are here. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sharon. And yeah, thank you very much for this. It's been a really, gnarly issue-oriented kind of discussion, which is the kind of thing I love because I'm just a policy nerd. But now I'm going to ask you a question. Not what is your favorite snack food, or if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be, which was a famous question that Barbara Walters once asked. But since this is the, running for Attorney General, here's the question, and I'm going to start with Andrea and go through the alphabetically. What is your favorite amendment to the US Constitution? I know what mine is. I know you haven't been asked that before, have you? I finally came up with a question no one else has asked.
I was like, I can't unmute.
Go ahead.
Well, it would have to be, the Constitution was written, I was 3/5, would be considered 3/5 of a human being. I don't know what else to say. Clearly it was changed, and we still have a lot of work to do in this country, given Buffalo. So I'm reminded of that.
So the amendment granting Black people the right to vote, or the emancipation, both of them? Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, Shannon.
Okay, just one.
Just
Equal
one.
Protection Clause, First Amendment, the right to privacy, which no longer exists according to our US Supreme Court. It's just so hard to choose just one.
Okay, I didn't hear an answer there, but that I'm going to let that
I gave you
pass.
multiple answers.
Quentin, your
I'm
favorite?
going to go with the
amendment?
14th Amendment, and I'm
14th?
building off of Andrea's answer and also building off of Shannon's. The 14th Amendment is at the core of our civil rights. It was passed in the wake of the Civil War as part of the reckoning with our country's shameful history of slavery, but it also has at the core of it a number of our most precious civil rights. It is those rights that Justice Alito and these radicals on the Supreme Court are attacking, and that we, as hopefully one of us will be the next Attorney General, are going to be called upon to use every power at the disposal of Massachusetts to fight to defend the 14th Amendment that really is very central to our civil rights.
Well, thank you. God, I really appreciate this time that you spent with us tonight. We had like over 130 people on, and this is one of the advantages of Zoom. So thank you very much for coming tonight. And I just want to remind everybody who's watching tonight, I don't think you need my reminder, but to remember to register and vote. Thank you very much for tonight.
Thank you, Renee. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.